No, the academy has been my home for the past 7 years, and of course, I have to take credit. I have to take credit. My family.
Kasi dito, wow, I was a wreck. So, parang pagpasok ko dito,
Guys, can you tell us about the match earlier? Seems very interesting.
Yeah, it was super fun. My very first mix double.
RAFA Nadal loses it. Mel Tyenko's brutal 7-word response shocks the tennis world. Eala disrespected by Australian Open. What's going on, tennis fanatics? Welcome back to Champions Tennisitics, the only channel brave enough to bring you the raw, unfiltered, and downright explosive truth from inside the tennis world. If you thought the Australian Open was just about forehands, backhands, and championship points, buckle up because you're in for the ride of your life. Today's story has everything: a national hero under attack, a media firestorm that's engulfing one of the biggest names in broadcasting, and a 22-time Grand Slam champion who just went absolutely nuclear in defense of his protege. We're talking about Alexandra Eala, the golden girl of Philippine tennis, the pride of an entire nation, and a young woman who's become the center of a controversy so massive it's got Rafael Nadal himself throwing haymakers in the press. And if that wasn't enough drama for you, wait until you hear about the absolute catastrophe that unfolded at the Australian Open, where tournament organizers made a scheduling decision so baffling, so disrespectful, that tennis legends Martina Navratilova and Lindsay Davenport went on live television and absolutely eviscerated them for it. But before we dive headfirst into the chaos, let's set the stage. Eala isn't just another tennis player trying to make it on the tour. She's a phenomenon. She's the first Filipino to win a Grand Slam singles title when she captured the U.S. Open Junior Championship back in 2022. She's a graduate of the prestigious RAFA Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain, where she trained alongside some of the best young talents in the world under the watchful eye of the King of Clay himself. She's carried the hopes and dreams of over 110 million Filipinos on her shoulders, and she's done it with grace, determination, and a smile that could light up an entire stadium. So when someone comes after Eala, they're not just coming after a tennis player. They're coming after a symbol of national pride, a beacon of hope for aspiring athletes across Southeast Asia, and most importantly, they're coming after someone who has powerful friends in very high places. And that's exactly what happened when veteran Filipino media personality Mel Tiangco allegedly unleashed a series of comments that sent shockwaves rippling through the tennis community and beyond. Now, let's be crystal clear about who Mel Tyenko is. She's not some random social media troll hiding behind a keyboard. She's a heavyweight in Philippine broadcasting, a respected journalist with decades of experience, and someone whose words carry significant weight in Filipino media circles, which makes what happened next all the more stunning. According to multiple reports that have been circulating like wildfire across tennis forums, social media platforms, and Filipino community groups worldwide, Tyenko allegedly made derogatory remarks about Eala. The timing couldn't have been worse, coming right before Eala's crucial appearance for the Philippine national team and her campaign at major tournaments. The nature of these comments has been described by some observers as mocking, dismissive, and according to certain interpretations, carrying undertones that crossed lines that should never be crossed. Here's where it gets absolutely wild. Mel Tyenko herself is Filipino. She shares the same heritage, the same cultural background, the same national identity as the young woman she allegedly targeted. And that's precisely what made Rafael Nadal's blood boil when word reached him back in Spain. Imagine being one of the greatest athletes of all time, a legend who's conquered every clay court on the planet, a warrior who's battled through injuries that would have ended lesser careers, and you hear that someone is attacking one of your academy graduates, someone you've mentored, someone you consider part of your tennis family. Rafa Nadal doesn't do things halfway. When he competes with every fiber of his being. And when he defends his own, he defends them with that same intensity. Sources close to the situation report that Nadal was absolutely furious when he learned about Tyenko's alleged comments. The man who normally maintains composure in press conferences, who chooses his words carefully, who represents the sport with dignity and class, reportedly let loose with a response that left people stunned. Nadal allegedly questioned how someone who shares Filipino heritage could make comments that many interpreted as having racist undertones toward another Filipino. The sheer audacity of it, the betrayal of shared cultural identity, the attack on someone who represents the best of what Philippine sports has to offer, it all apparently struck a nerve with the Spanish champion. But Rafa didn't stop at expressing his disappointment and anger. Oh no, he went further, much further. According to reports, Nadal demanded that Mel Tiangco issue a full, public, unconditional apology not just to Alexandra Eala personally, but to the entire Filipino people. Think about the weight of that demand. This is Rafael Nadal, a global icon, a man whose word carries immense influence in the tennis world and beyond, essentially calling out a major media figure and demanding accountability on an international stage. Powerfulness, a superstar defending his protege, David versus Goliath, except in this case, David has 22 Grand Slam titles and a serve that can blast through walls. Tennis fans around the world were watching this unfold with popcorn in hand, waiting to see how Tyenko would respond. Would she apologize? Would she clarify her comments? Would she try to explain what she meant? Well, what happened next is the stuff of absolute legend, and not in a good way if you're Team Rafa. Instead of backing down, instead of issuing a carefully worded statement through publicists, instead of trying to defuse the situation, Mel Tyenko apparently decided to go in the complete opposite direction. She allegedly fired back with a response so sharp, so defiant, so utterly unexpected that it left the tennis world and media circles absolutely speechless. 7 words. That's all it took. 7 carefully chosen words that reportedly shut down the entire conversation and left even Rafael Nadal, a man who stared down the greatest competitors in tennis history without flinching, without a comeback. The exact phrasing of these 7 words has been the subject of intense speculation and debate. Different sources report slightly different versions, but the core message was unmistakable. Mel Tyenko was not apologizing, she was not backing down, and she apparently didn't care who Rafael Nadal was or what he demanded. Think about the audacity of that for a second. Rafael Nadal, one of the most beloved and respected athletes on the planet, makes a public demand for an apology, and instead of compliance or contrition, he gets hit with a 7-word clapback that essentially tells him to mind his own business. It's the kind of bold move that either marks you as fearless or foolish, depending on which side of the debate you fall on. The fallout from this exchange has been massive. Filipino communities around the world have been divided. Some have rallied behind Eala and Rafael Nadal, calling Tyenko's alleged original comments inappropriate and her response to Nadal disrespectful. Others have defended Tyenko's right to express her opinions and praised her for not being intimidated by celebrity pressure. Social media has become a battleground, with hashtags flying, think pieces being written, and everyone from casual tennis fans to serious sports analysts weighing in on who's right and who's wrong. But here's what makes this situation even more complex and frustrating. At the heart of all this drama is a young woman who's just trying to play tennis and represent her country with pride. Eala didn't ask for any of this. She didn't want to be at the center of a media firestorm. She wanted to focus on her game, on improving her ranking, on making the Philippines proud on the biggest stages in tennis. Instead, she's become a symbol in a larger cultural conversation about respect, representation, and the responsibilities that come with having a public platform. And if you think that's where the disrespect toward Eala ended, you haven't heard anything yet. Because what happened at the Australian Open makes the Tyenko controversy look like a minor speed bump compared to the absolute train wreck of a scheduling decision that tournament organizers made. Let's paint the picture here. The Australian Open is one of the 4 Grand Slam tournaments, the biggest events in professional tennis. It's held in Melbourne, Australia, a city with one of the largest Filipino populations outside of the Philippines. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of Filipinos living in Australia, with Melbourne being a particular hub of Filipino culture and community. When Eala's name appeared on the draw, when it became clear she'd be competing in the main draw of the Australian Open, the Filipino community mobilized like you wouldn't believe. Eala isn't just popular in the Philippines. She's a megastar. She's the kind of athlete who transcends her sport. When she plays, it's an event. Families gather around televisions. Watch parties are organized. Filipino flags are waved with pride. She represents possibility. She represents breaking through barriers. She represents a nation that has produced incredible talent in boxing, basketball, and now, increasingly, in tennis. So when the match schedule was released and people saw that Eala's first-round match against American player Alicia Parks was assigned to Court 6, the reaction was immediate, and it was not positive. For those of you who might not be familiar with the layout of the Australian Open, let me explain why this was such a problem. The Australian Open has several show courts. Rod Laver Arena, the main stadium with a capacity of about 15,000. John Cain Arena, another major show court with nearly 11,000 seats. Margaret Court Arena, with a capacity of around 7,500. And then you have the outside courts. Court 6 is an outside court. It has limited seating, limited capacity, limited everything. It's the kind of court where you might schedule a first-round match between two relatively unknown qualifiers, not a match featuring one of the most popular and marketable players in the tournament. And that's exactly what tennis legends Martina Navratilova and Lindsay Davenport couldn't believe when they saw what was happening on the ground in Melbourne. Martina Navratilova, an 18-time Grand Slam singles champion, one of the greatest players to ever pick up a racket, someone who knows a thing or two about what makes a good tennis event, was working as a commentator for the Tennis Channel. She and Lindsay Davenport, herself a former world #1 and 3-time Grand Slam champion, were watching the situation unfold in real time, and they were absolutely appalled. Navratilova described scenes that sound more like a rock concert than a first-round tennis match. She talked about fans lined up in impossibly long queues, waiting patiently, desperately hoping to get a glimpse of their hero, knowing full well that many of them would never actually make it inside to watch the match. The image she painted was one of devoted fans, many of them Filipino-Australians who had taken time off work, traveled from across Melbourne and beyond, all to support Eala, only to be met with a logistical nightmare created by poor planning. Navratilova pointed out something crucial. The players themselves have no idea this is happening. Eala is in the locker room, preparing for her match, visualizing her game plan, trying to manage her nerves before stepping onto a Grand Slam court. And she has no clue that outside there are literally thousands of fans being turned away because the organizers put her on a court that's way too small. Lindsay Davenport backed up everything Navratilova was saying and added her own perspective. She tried to get to Court 6 herself, just to watch some tennis, just to see Alicia Parks play, because Parks is an exciting young American talent worth watching, and Davenport, a former champion and current commentator, couldn't get anywhere near the court. Think about that. A 3-time Grand Slam champion, someone with credentials and access that 99% of tennis fans could only dream of, couldn't get to the match because of overcrowding. Davenport made a point that should have been obvious to anyone doing even basic research. Eala is probably the most famous female athlete to ever come out of the Philippines. Not just the most famous tennis player, the most famous female athlete, period. She's certainly in the conversation for one of the most famous Filipino athletes across all sports. To schedule someone with that kind of drawing power, that kind of cultural significance, onto a tiny outside court demonstrates either shocking incompetence or a complete lack of awareness about the tournament's own fan base. And here's the kicker. Davenport specifically called out the fact that there's a massive Filipino audience in Melbourne and throughout Australia. This isn't some minor demographic consideration. This is a major portion of the tournament's potential fan base. Filipino Australians don't just casually follow tennis. They turn out in force to support their athletes. They buy tickets. They fill stadiums. They create the kind of electric atmosphere that makes tennis exciting to watch. To ignore that reality when making the schedule is inexcusable. Navratilova didn't pull any punches in her criticism. She directly addressed the organizers and told them they need to keep in mind where players are from and what the actual fan base is in the host city. It's not rocket science. If you're hosting a Grand Slam tournament in a city with a huge Filipino population and you have the biggest Filipino star in tennis competing, you put that match on a show court that can accommodate the demand. You don't bury it on Court 6 and then act surprised when chaos ensues. The whole situation raises serious questions about how tournament organizers make these decisions. Do they just look at rankings and seed numbers? Do they consider the marketability of players? Do they think about the local demographics and which matches might draw the biggest crowds? Based on what happened with Eala, It seems like at least one of those considerations was completely ignored, and it created a situation that was unfair to the fans, potentially distracting for the player and embarrassing for the tournament. And here's the tragic part. That chaotic atmosphere, that pressure cooker environment created by thousands of fans crammed around an inadequate venue, may have played a role in what happened on the court. Because what should have been a triumphant first-round victory turned into one of the most heartbreaking collapses you'll ever see in professional tennis. The bigger questions, though, the ones that go beyond just one tournament or one match, remain unanswered. Will the Australian Open organizers learn from this embarrassing scheduling debacle? Will they recognize that player popularity and cultural demographics need to be major factors in how they assign courts? Will they ensure that the next time a player with Eala's drawing power competes in Melbourne, that player gets the showcase stage they deserve? And what about the Mel Tiangco situation? Will that ever get resolved? Will Tyenko eventually respond to Rafael Nadal's demand for an apology? Or will those alleged 7 words be the final statement in that bitter feud? Will there be any acknowledgement of how those comments affected a young athlete who was just trying to focus on her game? Will there be any reflection on the responsibility that comes with having a media platform and the power to influence public opinion? These are questions that matter not just for Eala personally, but for the broader conversation about how we treat athletes, especially young athletes, especially athletes from countries that haven't traditionally been tennis powerhouses. The scrutiny, the pressure, the expectations, the criticism, it's all magnified when you're carrying the hopes of an entire nation. And when that criticism comes from within your own community, from people who share your heritage, it cuts even deeper. Eala is still only in her late teens, still early in her professional career, still learning how to navigate the challenges of life on the tour. She shouldn't have to deal with media controversies and disrespectful scheduling decisions on top of the already enormous pressure of trying to compete at the highest level of tennis. But she's handling it with a maturity and grace that honestly puts a lot of adults to shame. The tennis world is watching what happens next. The Filipino community is watching what happens next. And you can bet that Rafael Nadal, protective as ever of his academy graduates, is watching what happens next. This story is far from over. There will be more matches, more drama, more twists and turns. Because that's tennis. That's sports. That's life. But through it all, Eala keeps showing up. She keeps competing. She keeps representing the Philippines with pride and dignity. And that, more than any single match result, more than any controversy or scheduling snafu, is what makes her a true champion. So what do you think about all of this? Are you Team Rafa or Team Mel in this war of words? Do you think the Australian Open organizers should face consequences for their terrible scheduling decision? And do you believe Eala and her doubles partner can make a deep run in Melbourne despite the singles disappointment? We want to hear from you in the comments below. Drop your thoughts, your opinions, your predictions for what happens next. We read every single comment, and we love engaging with the Champions Tennisitics community. If you found this deep dive into the drama, the controversy, and the heartbreak surrounding Eala valuable, do us a huge favor and smash that like button. It genuinely helps the channel grow and allows us to keep bringing you this kind of in-depth, no-holds-barred coverage of the tennis world. And if you haven't already subscribed to Champions Tennisitics, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss out when we drop our next video breaking down the latest drama, the biggest upsets, and the most compelling stories from the world of tennis. This is Champions Tennisitics, your home for real tennis talk, signing off. We'll see you in the next one, where we'll continue following Eala's journey and all the other explosive stories coming out of the Australian Open and beyond. Until then, keep swinging, keep believing, and keep supporting the champions who make this sport great.
Nung lumipat po ako kasi dito, wow, I was a wreck. So, parang pagpasok ko dito,
excited about the games?
Oh, okay. Excited naman, syempre. Ang haba ng biyahe mulang Spain, but
After 1 year outside of the tour, I think it's the right moment to be back. I